The adventurer had only just left the tutorial, having passed all the knowledge's lessons and now faced with the open world at their feet. And already, someone desperately needed their help. A nearby village was under attack, meaning there was no time to lose. The adventurer had to spring into action to defend it, following the icon on their compass and their map to head toward the village in need. As they rushed in that direction, their allays, the little helpers at their sides, were gathering resources along the way. They were able to pick up anything the adventurer needed as they passed countless trees, stones, and other useful resources that could come in handy in their quest. Racing through the fields of speed wheat, the adventurer moved even faster to their destination, and thanks to the extra boost, they made it in time to see what was unfolding at the village. Piglins! 20 of them were ransacking the area. Not exactly a huge army, but luckily the adventurer had an army of their own. They summoned a small group of golems by creating spawners, using the resources they'd gathered on their journey to summon enough to take on the piglins. They leaped into the fray, freeing groups of villagers that the piglins had trapped in cages, and using their own attacks to help their golem army take down the attacking mobs. Before long, the piglins were defeated, and the battle was won. The villagers, grateful to have been freed, were even more thankful to the adventurer as they helped to rebuild their township. They set up a brand new carpenter hut right in the center of town. However, there wasn't time to celebrate and commemorate the victory for much longer. No sooner had the hut been finished than another village began calling for help. The adventurer hurried off to aid those in need as their quest to become a Minecraft legend continued. Once again relying on their map and compass to guide them and their allays to gather resources as they ventured to the other village nearby, the adventurer signaled their surviving golems to follow them. The mobs that were left charged, following the adventurer into battle once more. The next village was also under siege by piglins, although faring better than the first. There were only 15 of them attacking this time around, meaning the adventurer and their mobs could sweep through the village and drive the piglins out. The golems swung their fists, bashing the dangerous mobs away and destroying them in a battle that raged for only a few seconds before victory was once again secured. The adventurer was on a roll. The villagers here in this new settlement wanted to offer some assistance, so they directed the adventurer toward a chest at the center of town. Inside was a wealth of resources to aid the adventurer on their quest. Plenty of wood and stone, as well as other rarer materials like prismarine, which could be used to upgrade special structures that the adventurer could make. But suddenly a fresh wave of piglins descended on the village. The others had only been the first wave, the advanced party. Now was another attacking from all sides. Thinking fast, the adventurer built a loose ring of arrow towers using their resources, and these began to fire at the oncoming piglins. There were multiple waves of reinforcements arriving over the span of around 2 minutes, so the adventurer had to retreat when they suffered some damage, allowing their towers and golems to do some of the fighting on their behalf. After some intense fighting, the village was securely defended, but there was still an ongoing problem of the piglin attacks. So the adventurer made sure to get their army back up to full strength before they set out to take care of the problem at the source. Scattered around the overworld were outposts where the piglins were spawning, and a full frontal attack was the best way to deal with these pesky piglins. The adventurer knew they needed to be able to take on the piglin hordes, but also damage their structures. So in order to achieve that, they made sure they summoned a good balance of plank golems to do more damage against the piglins, and cobblestone golems to take care of their buildings. They arrived at the outpost with their army to see it was full of piglin pits and nether spreaders. The pits were spawning more and more piglins to fight the golems. Meanwhile, deadly clouds of red poison were billowing out of the dangerous nether spreaders. The adventurer had to stay back at a safe distance and let their loyal mobs lead the charge for this battle. The piglin pit was the first target. If they didn't take that out first, then more and more would just keep spawning. Under the adventurer's command, the cobblestone golems got to work smashing the pit to pieces, while the plank golems battled the piglins that were emerging from it. After that had been taken care of, destroying the nether spreader and finishing off the remaining few piglin stragglers was a piece of cake. But that wasn't the only outpost. So, determined to defend the overworld from these attackers from the nether, the adventurer and their army set off to their next objective. This new outpost was surrounded by a dangerous lava moat, with no way for the golems to safely cross. But luckily, the adventurer had an idea: a ramp. Picking a safe location to start, they got to use some of their gathered resources to build a way across. Once it was complete, their mobs followed them over the ramp as the adventurer led the charge toward the next outpost. Breaking through the gate, the golems stormed the piglin outpost. They had an even bigger fight on their hands, thanks to this outpost having 2 piglin pits, with even more piglins crawling out to enter the battle. The adventurer and their golems used all their might to push back the swarms of pesky piglins. Then the cobblestone golems could use their strength to destroy the spawning pits. One outpost remained. Destroying that would hopefully mean the overworld would be safe from these continuous piglin attacks. Villagers could go about their days without having to worry about calling for help or being trapped in cages at the hands of some nasty visitors from the Nether. Sitting atop a plateau, the newest outpost would take a bit of a climb to get to, and that might tire out the golems, making them too exhausted to fight by the time they reached the top. Luckily, the adventurer had a plan to use the same cunning idea that had gotten them safely across the lava moat. They constructed another ramp, giving their mobs an easier route to the top of the plateau. When they arrived, there weren't any of the defenses they'd come to expect at this outpost. No gates blocking their way, no nether spreaders spewing deadly poison, but there were a pair of blaze rod towers. They instantly began launching fiery projectiles at the golems, blasting the frontmost rows of the mobs. The adventurer, thinking fast, commanded their golem army to charge forward, with the cobblestone golems going first. If they surrounded both blaze rod towers simultaneously, they could work on taking both out of the equation. Meanwhile, they instructed the plank golems to go encircle the cobblestone golems, so they could form a defensive perimeter and fight off the swarms of freshly spawned piglins. With the tower successfully toppled and the outpost piglin pit destroyed, so no more of the half-pig creatures could come through, it seemed like victory was now at hand for the adventurer and their army. Surely now the overworld was secure and protected against any further encounters with the forces of the Nether. But the adventurer wasn't convinced. Someone had to set up all these outposts to begin with, and commanded the piglins to attack the villagers, and there was only one place they could have come from: the Nether. Rather than try to attack the Nether head-on, the adventurer took a different approach and decided that a far wiser strategy would be to work on improving their army and building techniques. After all, they'd removed the threat of piglin attacks for now, so it was best to use that time to prepare for the battles that lay ahead. They traveled to the Well of Fate, and there they learned the ability to gather iron. This would allow them to create spawners that would spawn even stronger golems to fight for them, including grindstone golems and mossy golems. Grindstone golems were much better at taking out lots of weaker piglins at once, while mossy golems could spray healing water over the adventurer and their mob army to help them recover quickly from damage. There were plenty of other improvements that the adventurer could have built, but they lacked the right amount of prismarine. The way to obtain more prismarine was to gather it from destroyed piglin structures, and as luck would have it, another outpost had appeared nearby. The adventurer made the right call, biding their time to improve their forces. They head off to destroy it, making sure to gather up any iron they came across along the way. When they arrived, the adventurer had the option of only sending in one specific type of mob to attack at the time, but they had massed such an army of different golems that they could easily take down this outpost through sheer force alone. And sure enough, that was what they did. The golems stormed the piglins' outpost, tearing down all the structures they could find. They even freed some villagers that had been imprisoned around the outpost. Suddenly, just as they managed to best the piglins yet again, the sky went dark. The outpost had been a diversion. The piglins had sacrificed a portion of their forces just to distract the adventurer and their army from their newest creation, a night beacon. The piglins had triggered an eternal night, disrupting the normal flow of time in the overworld. The adventurer knew that they had to take it upon themselves to destroy it, and made sure to create some new spawners to build their army back up to full strength. With their forces replenished, they set off to go and restore the natural flow of time. Getting closer to the night beacon, they were able to create a new structure, a well house. This tall building could act as a new place to respawn and fast travel to, which made it handy, especially as they were about to head into one heck of a fight to destroy the beacon. For good measure, they set up some defenses around it too, some basic walls and a gate, giving the well house some extra security to protect it in case it was attacked. The adventurer and their forces charged into the fray, launching an all-out attack on the night beacon. This was by far their toughest battle, clashing head-on with more piglins than they'd ever fought. The adventurer commanded their golems to concentrate their attacks on the Nether portal that was the source of the night beacon. They didn't need to waste time tearing down all the structures like they'd done at the outposts. Instead, they needed to focus solely on the ones that had been built to protect the portal. Taking that out was the key to victory this time, not wiping out every piglin building in sight. The adventurer commanded a portion of their forces to head over to the piglin pits and plug those for good. Otherwise, they'd be driven back by more and more waves of enemies. The golems moved around the perimeter, clearing the pits around one of the gates, so they wouldn't be outflanked and trapped inside the night beacon base by more piglins. Punching a hole in the outer perimeter, they were able to gain entrance to the base and got to work taking down the more dangerous structures that stood between them and the Nether portal. Luckily, the golems had already had plenty of practice destroying blaze rod towers. The base was teeming with structures and mobs that were hindering the golems' efforts to reach the portal. The adventurer thought that they should just push on, keeping their forces on the offensive and having them destroy the piglin pits and the blaze rod towers. But they looked at the state of their army and in the midst of battle remembered their earlier decision to take the time they needed to improve before forging on. So the adventurer called for a brief tactical retreat, pulling their army of mobs back to a safe distance for a time so they could recover. The mossy golems were on hand to offer their healing to the others, while the adventurer set about summoning more golems with spawners to replenish the ranks of their army. They had learned a valuable lesson in their early battles about escalation. Progress meant battles would get harder and take longer, so tactical retreats and rebuilding their army at every opportunity was the path to securing victory and avoiding being wiped out altogether by those pesky piglins. With enough of their golems either healed up or summoned and ready to fight, the adventurer led another almighty charge a few short moments later. The piglin forces hadn't been prepared for their adversaries to return from their retreat so quickly. In fact, the Nether mob's army thought they'd driven their opponents away, but now suddenly they were thrust back into the fight unprepared. The golems, under the wise command of their leader, the adventurer, smashed their way through the piglins. The Nether mobs were no match for the replenished ranks of the golems. The plank and grindstone golems were able to swiftly take care of the piglins spawning out of their pits. Meanwhile, the cobblestone golems worked on toppling those burning blaze rod towers. With the structures down, they charged toward the Nether portal. Having pushed back the piglins, the mighty mobs under the adventurer's command wasted no time in tearing apart the Nether portal. The adventurer joined them, matching them blow for blow, while making sure that enough of their forces were alert and protecting the army from the few remaining piglins still trying to stop them. They hacked and smashed at the Nether portal, knowing that destroying it was their only chance at restoring the natural cycle of day and night to the overworld. Then, with a decisive blow, the portal toppled. It seemed like victory was at hand, but the adventurer could never foresee what would happen next. The overworld around them changed suddenly. 3 distinct factions of piglins appeared on the map, each with their own much larger outposts, as well as smaller ones scattered around. They had successfully destroyed the night beacon, but now the piglins were running amok across the overworld. The adventurer couldn't help but feel defeated, as if all the hard work they'd done to take down the piglin outposts and protect the villagers had all been in vain. They'd built up their army of golems, but now 3 whole hordes of piglins had spread across the overworld. But then the adventurer looked around at their golems, the mobs that they had commanded that had only gotten bigger and stronger since they began their journey. Every battle had been a lesson, a chance to learn and improve, and once they'd won, they came away even stronger than before. They had gotten stronger than before, improved their building and their battle plans, and that meant that they could do so again. Gathering up their golems, the adventurer had a new quest ahead of them. They'd saved a few villages, but now it was time to save the world. They surveyed the changed world before them. 3 major factions of piglins had invaded from the Nether. They were the Horde of the Hunt, the Horde of the Spore, and the Horde of the Bastion. Destroying them was their new goal. But the adventurer remembered the lessons their battles had taught them. Attacking head-on worked sometimes, but taking the time to improve before the fight was always a wiser move. Marching up to one of the piglin horde's new portal outposts, like the base they just destroyed, wasn't something the adventurer and their army was prepared for yet. But they weren't the only ones that the Nether's army of mobs were under threat from. Across the overworld, the piglins were attacking everyone, even creepers, zombies, and skeletons. But this gave the adventurer an idea. They had quickly come up with a far better plan than a full-on attack against any one of the 3 major hordes. What if, instead, they started smaller and helped the other mobs drive the piglins back, and in return enlist the help of those creatures for the next fight? The more mobs they helped, the bigger their army would grow, and before long they'd be able to kick the piglins out of the overworld for good. So they led their army to the homestead of skeletons, fighting alongside their bony archers until they fended off the piglins. The skeletons agreed to join forces with the adventurer and their army of various golems. Together, they stood a far greater chance of defeating the invading hordes of piglins. The same happened when the adventurer assisted the explosive creepers and undead zombies. Before long, many mobs had joined the ranks of this growing resistance movement. Then, having observed enough of the differences between the 3 hordes, the adventurers decided who they'd take on first. The Horde of the Hunt had very little in the way of defenses except for their larger number of piglin troops, so they'd be a longer fight, but taking care of them would remove a large chunk of the piglins' forces. And besides their newly expanded army at their back, including skeletons, creepers, and zombies, and many types of golems, they had the forces they needed to match the piglins easily. They confronted each horde directly, toppling them one after the other. Each had their own different styles of fighting and varying tactics, but the adventurer accepted the challenge that they posed. Each one would be a chance to learn more about their enemies and how to best manage their own army. The Horde of the Spore made use of elevated bases, which meant they were a pretty big nuisance. But working on their building techniques meant the adventurer could level the playing field, making use of the Horde's high ground advantage for their own forces. The Horde of the Bastion's outpost required the most effort to break into, so the adventurer made sure to send in their best structure-demolishing mobs for the initial attacks, protecting them from a distance with skeleton archers, and keeping the rest of their forces at bay so they weren't at risk until it was their time to enter the fray. Each smaller outpost destroyed was a stepping stone toward a greater victory. The adventurer took their time taking care of the smaller structures first, dismantling each horde piece by piece as they worked their way up to the bigger bases. Each outpost destroyed would anger the leaders of the three hordes until the adventurer's army reached their Nether portal outposts. All three of these various piglin generals made the same mistake. In their anger, they emerged from their Nether portals, itching for a fight. But this gave the adventurer and their army the perfect opportunity to take them down and wipe out each horde for good. Defeating the first two generals, leaders of the Hordes of the Hunt and the Spore, even inspired many villagers to join the fight. Many became warriors, and the adventurer was able to recruit these battle-ready villagers to their cause. Before long, the remaining horde leader in charge of the Horde of the Bastion had also fallen. Under the wise leadership of the adventurer, many mobs of the overworld had fought back against the piglins' invasion. But the ultimate challenge was about to reveal itself. Only they could take down the piglins' fiercest warrior and save the world. In order to become a true Minecraft legend, they'd have to defeat the Great Pig.